Arrival of Africans in Brazil. Brazil holds a distinction that reshapes how we understand the African diaspora. It is home to the largest population of African descendants outside the African continent. Between the early 1500s and the late 1800s, historians estimate that nearly 40% of all enslaved Africans transported across the Atlantic were taken to Brazil. That figure alone forces us to pause. Almost half of the African human beings forced into the Americas arrived in one country. They came from West and Central Africa, from kingdoms and societies that existed long before European colonial expansion, from the Congo Kingdom, from Ndongo, Angola, from Yoruba city-states Dahomey, from regions that today are Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, and Congo. They were not a single people. They were farmers, ironworkers, traders, healers, musicians, warriors, and spiritual leaders. They carried agricultural techniques that shaped plantation economies. They carried metallurgical knowledge. They carried systems of governance. They carried cosmologies, understandings of the universe, but they did not cross the Atlantic willingly. The transatlantic slave trade was violent, destabilizing entire African regions, separating families, fracturing communities, and yet, even in forced migration, culture traveled. Language patterns survived in rhythm and pronunciation. Spiritual systems adapted under new names. Food traditions continued in altered landscapes. Brazil was built with African labor, in sugar, in gold mining, in coffee plantations, in port cities. But more than that, Brazil was culturally transformed by African presence. The African diaspora in Brazil is not a footnote in Brazilian history. It is foundational, quilombos and resistance. Enslavement did not erase the human instinct for freedom. Throughout Brazil, enslaved Africans resisted in small ways and large ones. Some slowed production, some sabotaged tools, some preserved forbidden traditions in secret, and some escaped. Across forests, mountains, and remote interior regions, escaped Africans formed independent communities known as quilombos. These were not temporary camps. They were structured societies. They grew crops. They developed defense strategies. They organized leadership. They preserved African languages and spiritual traditions. The most well-known was the Quilombo dos Palmares. For nearly a century, Palmares resisted colonial forces. At its height, it held thousands of residents. It functioned as an African polity in exile. Palmares represents something powerful. It represents the refusal to disappear. Its remembered leader, Zumbi, became a symbol of resistance, not only for Afro-Brazilians, but for broader black liberation movements. Resistance in Brazil was not just rebellion, it was reconstruction. It was the rebuilding of African life under impossible conditions. Even in displacement, African political thought survived. Capoeira e Candomblé, menos cultura survival. Violence attempted to strip identity. Culture refused to be stripped. Capoeira is one of the clearest examples. What appears today as a martial art combined with music and dance began as a survival strategy. Enslaved Africans blended combat techniques with rhythm, disguising training as performance. The roda, the circle, became both stage and shield. Movement carried memory. The body itself became archive. Spiritual systems also endured. African religious traditions transformed into Candomblé. Under colonial scrutiny, ancestral deities were preserved through symbolic association. The orishas of Yoruba cosmology survived through ritual, song, and coded continuity. Drums were more than instruments. They were communication. Ceremony was more than belief. It was identity. Through Capoeira and Candomblé, Africans in Brazil protected lineage. They created spaces where Africa remained alive, not geographically, but spiritually. Culture became resistance. Salvador, Bahia menos a cultural capital. To see this continuity visibly, we look to Salvador, in the state of Bahia. Salvador was one of the primary ports where enslaved Africans arrived. Today, Bahia has one of the highest proportions of Afro-descended people in Brazil. Walk through Salvador's historic districts, and you see Africa's imprint, in the cadence of speech, in the flavors of acarajé cooked in palm oil, in percussion ensembles filling public squares, in white garments worn in spiritual observance. Bahia is often described as the heart of Afro-Brazilian culture, but it is not preserved in glass. It is lived. Capoeira rodas unfold in open plazas. Candomblé ceremonies continue quietly. Music shaped by African rhythm structures animates daily life. Salvador represents not nostalgia, but survival. It is a reminder that diaspora does not mean disappearance. It means adaptation, modern identity beyond abolition. Brazil abolished slavery in 1888. It was one of the last countries in the Western Hemisphere to do so. Freedom, however, did not come with structural equality. Formerly enslaved Africans were given little land, little compensation, and limited access to education. Over time, Brazil promoted an image of racial democracy, suggesting that its mixing of populations meant racism was minimal. But economic disparities told another story. Afro-Brazilians have historically faced disproportionate poverty and underrepresentation in political and economic power, yet identity has not diminished. In recent decades, Afro-Brazilian movements have strengthened. There has been a renewed emphasis on African ancestry in schools, in fashion, in music, in politics. Young Afro-Brazilians increasingly identify proudly with African heritage. The diaspora is not only about survival, it is about reclamation. Identity once suppressed is now asserted. In Pan-African unity, the story of Africans in Brazil is not isolated. It connects to Haiti's revolution, to Jamaica's Maroons, to Colombia's Palancas, to Suriname's forest communities, to the Gullah Geechee in the United States. Across the diaspora, similar patterns emerge. Forced migration, resistance, cultural preservation, modern reclamation. Understanding Brazil strengthens a larger truth. The African diaspora is not fragmentation, it is extension. The Atlantic did not divide Africa permanently, it expanded it. When we learn about Afro-Brazilian history, we are learning about ourselves wherever we are in the diaspora. Knowledge closes distance, culture creates recognition, and recognition builds unity. Brazil is not separate from Africa, it is part of Africa's extended narrative, and that narrative continues. Like and subscribe for more videos like this and our efforts to unite the African diaspora.